You want me to go first?
I'll allow it.
Okay. Hi, Grace Fellowship. I'm Vicki Ballenger.
And I'm Kenny Ballenger.
And we are the owners of Ballenger Farm and Homestead in Sunbury, Ohio. Little 5-acre homestead. A year after we were married, we launched into probably the most difficult journey of our life. There's a lot of things that we prayed for, and we're going to be talking about how God does not always answer our prayers in the way that we think He should, but how God was with us every single step of the way.
And how did we keep our sanity? Well, God had something to do with that. So we want to talk about trusting God when it doesn't look so easy, when it doesn't look like He's in control. He is, no matter what. We learn to trust God even more, and that He is always there for us and had a plan the entire time. Okay, so I'll start with saying something, that the little comedy where I'll allow it. Drew, did you explain that by any chance?
Last week I did. I don't think everybody was here, but...
Okay, that stuck with us because that was a joke where he, to keep his manliness and stay in control but allow something, he was like, I'll allow it. So well, as soon as we invited us to come here, we thought we've got to put that in there. So I'll allow it. Go ahead and go first.
If you see us looking at the iPad, I made us some notes so that we don't go off on too many rabbit trails. This will just kind of help us keep on track. So I'm going to go ahead and let you start with your intro.
Oh, okay. So the how did I grow up and how did I come to faith in Christ? That's kind of like, my testimony is you could have an hour itself, okay? But to condense it, I grew up in a family that was non-believers. And by the way, I'm just not used to sitting in a chair in front of people, so I'm sorry. But I didn't have believers in the family, but we had some others that were extended family that were believers that were quite the hypocritical Christian. Now, obviously, we're all hypocrites in the sense that we cannot live up to Christ. Right? That we can't live up to the law. We can't be perfect. We can't do that. That's why Christ came. But I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to the better than thou. So these were the people that looked down on you, looked like you were less. That was the Christianity that I saw. And my mother did not appreciate that, very much so. My father was not really into anything like that, and they had gotten divorced when I was 6 years old, and we bounced around a ton. So fast forward, I went to college for automotive. As Drew said, I am a mechanic. I'm certified. I have my own shop, and yet my truck broke down. There's a reason for that. But that was what I did, and I was actually a DJ for a while, and that's, I did some other cool stuff like that. It was really fun, but there was something lacking. And through, again, a whole set of scenarios, I ended up giving my life to Christ. That was actually at the church that we attended for many years. A traveling guy came through, gave his testimony, and it just hit me right between the eyes. That this guy, how could he be saved? If he can be saved, so can I. And so I turned my life over to the Lord, and that had happened while we were dating, and we had broken up, and it had devastated me. And I got saved, and that kind of led us on a journey back to eventually being married. So that's the 30,000-foot view of a really big story. Go ahead.
My journey with faith is pretty much completely the opposite. I grew up in the church. My grandfather was the preacher, so I went to church every Sunday watching my grandfather preach. And then my parents, I had a brother. I was only 3 years old when he died in a car accident, and shortly thereafter, my mom and dad got divorced, which tends to happen. There's a very high percentage of divorce when there's a tragedy in the family, especially involving a child. And my parents got divorced. We left the church. I think I was 10, and I had not made a decision for Christ at that time, although I called myself a Christian, and that's a whole other story. So I grew up in the church and then came back to the knowledge of Christ when I was in my late 20s. And so Kenny and I were both fairly new believers when we launched onto this journey with our daughter.
Yeah. I also want to point out something that there was some statistics I had stumbled across, and we'd kind of made a pact. This is a few years into our marriage and Ava's birth, obviously. The statistics are 50% of marriages fail. That's just nationwide. And unfortunately, it's in the church and outside the church. with a special needs child, it's actually more than 80%. So you've already got the 50, and then you now have almost 80. I know that's not the right math, but almost 80% of those families, whether they have faith or not, break up, divorce.
Within the first 5 years.
Within the first 5 years. And when we saw that statistic, we were like, no, this is not going to be us. We're probably going to want to kill each other maybe at times, or be in the total slums at times. But we cannot allow this. We've got to hold on to Christ, and that's been our pact since. I just want to throw that stat out there because when I heard it, it was devastating. And it's true. I know families because we're in that community. We know families that have divorced.
So I'm going to go ahead and share Ava's story. And if you want to go ahead and put up the slide for Ava's first week of life while you're working on that. So Ava is our 14-year-old daughter. She just turned 14 New Year's Eve. And she was a planned home birth. Our first child, we had a very quick labor, so she was a planned home birth, and after the labor did not progress, we decided to, after 16 hours of labor and no progression, we decided to transfer to the hospital. It was during the trip to the hospital that my midwife was monitoring her heart tones, and they were getting slower and slower. And by the time we pulled up to the ER, she basically had no heartbeat. So they hurried, got me into a room. They got Ava delivered, and she was, if anybody's heard of APGAR scores, babies are usually assigned an APGAR score. Her APGAR scores were 0 and 0, so she was completely without life. She was born gray. A lot of babies that are born not breathing are born blue. She was actually born pale gray. She had been gone, they estimate, for 15 to 20 minutes by the time she was out. And brain cells start to die after 5 minutes. So by all clinical means, she should have not been resuscitated. But I remember they were working on her and giving her shots of adrenaline and doing chest compressions. And I told Kenny, I grabbed him by the collar because he was just standing there crying. And I remember I was still laying in bed, and I grabbed him and I shoved him towards the table. I said, go pray for her. And he got down on his knees, and as soon as he started to pray, her heart rate came back. And if you've not gone through something like this, when she came back, we assumed, okay, everything's fine. We're going to be good now. What we didn't realize is that lack of oxygen had caused a severe insult to her brain. So Ava was born at 9:51 p.m. on New Year's Eve. And I remember they took me back to our room. And I remember I was calling. Am I causing some interference with the? Okay. I just want to make sure it wasn't something I was doing. I remember very distinctly this tragedy had just unfolded in our life, and you just want to talk to family. And I remember I was calling everybody I knew, my family, my brothers, my sister-in-laws. Nobody was answering me back. And then it dawned on me, I was like, everybody's out partying. It's New Year's Eve. And it was so surreal because here I am in a hospital bed with my baby fighting for her life, and my whole family was out partying. They didn't know. I didn't blame them, but I remember I just felt very, very alone. And so basically what happened to Ava in medical terms is when the brain goes without oxygen that long, all of the organ systems shut down, and it starts from basically the bottom up. All of the organ systems shut down in an effort to preserve the brain. So her kidneys had shut down, her stomach, her whole GI system had shut down, obviously her heart had shut down. And when that happens, there's a term called metabolic acidosis, where there's actually the acid levels raise, and the acid levels actually damage the organs. So she had suffered metabolic acidosis, she had suffered severe brain injury. And I remember the neurologist coming in and telling us this, and I'm a registered nurse now, but I was not back then. And I remember he was telling me all of these medical terms, and I was like, yeah. When can we take her home? And he's like, I don't think you understand. And that's when he hit us with it. He said, we're transporting her to Children's Hospital. We don't expect her to survive. And so we went to Children's, and we basically, that began the journey hour by hour. And the thing I remember the most is in her NICU unit. If anybody's ever been inside of a NICU, she was in an isolette, which I'm sure you've seen on TV or in person, and she had all of these machines. And I'll never forget, I walked up and she had her own nurse. That nurse was assigned to only her, and that nurse did not move because she was so unstable that the nurse literally sat there her entire shift and watched her machines. So, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, very, very surreal. I believe, making sure it's angle-wise, back one picture, the upper right corner, the thing she's talking about is where she's in that kind of that little bed. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And that's kind of a little bit later, but that's still with the first NICU visit, I do believe. And, there's a feed tube that's going down her throat. There's oxygen on her. There's probes. There's a GI. I mean, overwhelming, to say the least. And when we've already had, a son that's healthy, and to have a daughter that is not healthy, I was in the same boat as Vicki was. When are we going home with her? When are we going home with her? This will be temporary. This is just like you see, if somebody goes in an accident, they're in the NICU, or they're in the ICU for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a few months, and they jump out of it and they come home. That wasn't the case. It wasn't going to be the case. And lots and lots of prayer, but lots and lots of prayer. But, that when we said in our intro video that God doesn't answer our prayers the way we think he should, he didn't. He did answer saving her life. He did answer our needs. He did provide in everything that we actually needed, but it wasn't what we thought we wanted. I mean, who wouldn't want a healthy child? I mean, obviously. I don't know. I still to this day don't know his full plan, but I can tell you that here I am talking to you because of my daughter. I can also tell you that there have been many nurses that have come into our home that have gotten saved or their lives changed because of her. That's not going to happen if her condition doesn't exist. So that is where I'm getting slightly off track, but I want to bring it back to God. He's got her, and he has us, and he has any of you that trust in him. But it doesn't look like it when you look at that picture. It didn't look like it when we saw that event unfolding. We can look back at it now, but I couldn't see that when I was in the middle of it. She talked about reaching her out to her friends. I had called my parents, and I love them, but they weren't cold, but it was okay, and they hung up. Like, I told them everything that's going on, and they didn't know what to do. They just, no support, they cared, but it was, I'm sorry to hear that, I'll have to get back to you. And I can understand the shock, but I mean, we're both isolated. We both just laid in the kind of hospital bed thing they give you off to the side room and just bawled our eyes out, because what are we going to do? I don't know how to, I'm a mechanic. I don't know how to take care of a person, right? If it's a car, okay. But a person, no, not like that.
Well, and I remember, I think when it hit both of us, because both of us were in that mindset of, okay, let's just get her healed up,
Yep.
and we'll get her home.
Yep.
And we were both very much in denial that this was a lifelong issue. And I remember when it really hit both of us, if anyone's ever dealt with anybody in the special needs world, when you have a child that has multiple issues and they're in the hospital, they have these things called care conferences. And I remember we were at Children's Hospital in Columbus, and her neurologist, her pulmonologist, her respiratory therapist, social workers, I mean, there literally must have been 20 people in this meeting. So we walk in, and there's this long, like, it's where they held board meetings, this long 20-plus foot table, and all these medical professionals are on one side, and here's me and Kenny on the other side. And I think there was a social worker sitting there with us for support. And they laid it all out. They said, this is the reality of her condition. You're going to, when she goes home, she's going to require round-the-clock nursing. You're going to have medical staff in your home. And, afterwards, they all exited the room, and that's when I had my first breakdown. I was like, this can't be happening. Mm-hmm. And I remember she did come home. That picture was actually taken. So she spent 3 months, her first 3 months of life in the ICU. She came home. She did not have a trach and a vent at that time. She was on oxygen through her nose. And because she didn't have a gag reflex, she wasn't able to clear herself. And I'll try not to use a lot of medical terms because I've gotten so used to it. But we had to suction her constantly to keep her mouth and nose clear. And she kept getting pneumonia. And she got pneumonia 3 times. The first time she got pneumonia, she was in the hospital for 2 or 3 days. They treated her, we took her home. She got pneumonia 2 weeks later. She was in the hospital a week and came home. Then she got pneumonia the 3rd time, and that 3rd time just about killed her. She ended up back in the PICU for 3 more months. So in 2008, she was in the hospital a total of 6 months, and that was actually her 3rd bout of pneumonia right there. They had to put her in that chair so she could breathe because she had to sit up. When she went into the hospital for the 2nd long-term stay, they could not get her to keep her oxygen sats up. And that's when they talked to us and they said she really needs to be on a ventilator, and she ended up having a surgery to put in a tracheostomy. And so we went home that year, after 3 months. And so we had been at that time living with medical staff in our home. And one of the things I want to share that encompasses some of the emotions I was dealing with. Kenny still got up and went to work every day, but by this time I had left my job to stay home with her. I remember one day I was just very emotional. I was crying. I couldn't hold it together. And I just wanted to be alone. I just wanted to go in my room and cry by myself. I didn't want anybody talking to me. And I remember Ava's nurse had to ask me a question, and it wasn't even an important question. A doctor had called and asked something, and I remember she was calling up the stairs to me, and I just didn't answer her. And I ended up shutting my bedroom door. So she comes up the stairs, and she's calling my name, and I'm like, unbelievable, I just want to be by myself. I remember actually backing into my closet and locking myself in the closet just to have privacy in my own home. And that's when it really hit me. And that just gives you an indication when you have medical staff in your home, there is no privacy. They hear everything. They see your good days. They see your bad days. I don't care how good your marriage is. You're going to have days where you fight with your husband. You're going to say ugly things that you don't mean. And all of it's on display. And it's hard. I mean, it is very hard. Very early on, Kenny and I learned to laugh at a lot of things. The initial 2 or 3 months of nurses that came in our home, they were sent to us by an agency. This is going to sound terrible, but again, it was just, we had to learn to laugh. But there was one nurse that came in our house, and she raised tarantulas. And during her shift, she would talk about how she had to get off work so she could go and buy food for her tarantulas. And I remember Kenny came home from work one day, and he goes, "Tarantula lady's not coming back."
That became her name.
I said, okay, I'll call the agency and let them know. But during that first year, we had so many different nurses in our home, and trying to find, I remember I was telling a friend recently, imagine your best friend in the whole world. Like, think of the person that you, besides your spouse, think of the person you trust the most, your best friend. Now imagine they're in your house 40 to 50 hours a week. I don't care how much you love somebody, after 40 to 50 hours, they're going to get on your nerves. So no matter how much, and we've had some awesome nurses over the years, but it's still hard. So we finally got back home, and keep in mind, when Ava was born, I was in a very high-paying job. I was a marketing director for Toyota. We had gotten accustomed to a certain lifestyle based on that income, and I was forced to become an overnight stay-at-home mom. And that income went away. And I'll never forget, I'll just share this and send it back over to you, but transitioning from making really good money and not having to worry about bills to having a very sick child and losing everything. I remember I had this really nice Chevy Tahoe, and I was dressed in a business suit, and I was going to the welfare office to apply for food stamps. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I'm sitting here in this business suit and I'm going to apply for welfare. I mean, it was so humbling. And, but you know, that service was there for us. And, 2008, I
think you might be jumping ahead a little bit. Go ahead.
2008, Ava came home, and so she was in the hospital for 6 months combined, and I had lost my job. And during this time, they had began the foreclosure proceedings on our home. And so.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm an order guy too, so I was trying to keep it. I wanted to jump in and just say the two small things. Back to the funny. So there's a serious story and then sorry, I got to bring the mic up. Serious story and a funny story. The serious story is in the picture up there. We were on the way to the hospital, and it had started as non-emergency but important. And we had oxygen in cylinders in the house, and I threw a fresh cylinder, which is wrapped and sealed, in the van. And we start to head down to Children's, and on the way, her oxygen sats dropped terribly. Like it went from 90%, 80%, 70%, 60%, 50%. If you don't understand, anything below 80 gets pretty critical. And it's dropping, and she's in the back with Ava, and I said, you know, that there's an oxygen tank in the back, grab that. She pulls the tank, and it's empty. Brand new, unsealed tank, empty. And her sats continue to drop, and I remember her picking her up and just praying with her, and because if we don't get oxygen, it's over. And I'm praying, but we're still heading, and I'm calling 911 on the phone while we're passing, and I'm telling them what's going on, and this is what our situation is. They tell us pull over on Route 71, which is a big main interstate in Ohio, and we'll send someone to you. And they did, but by the time they got there, her sats were back up. We didn't do anything. She was just holding her. And God had brought her sats back to like 95, 98%. No oxygen, no suction, no change. And so that was like just another miracle that you saw later. And then that whole process, like, I could spend, so much time, but that one always sticks with me because I remember that. I've only called, 911 like one other time in my entire life. And that there was this urgency that was just beyond belief. So then the funny story is to try to kind of flip that and go with the nursing. I think this was after Tarantula Lady. There was a time where there was a nurse that showed up and I wasn't expecting her, and I was laying on the couch. She was like in our living room at that time, Ava was. And the nurse had showed up either earlier than anticipated or I had my times wrong. And, I was just sleeping in I don't know, I think I had a shirt on. And so she's knocking on the door, and I throw on what I think are sweatpants and a shirt, and I answer the door, let her in. She gets all situated. I go back to my room and I'm going to go to change. I realized that I had put on a sweatshirt upside down, and I'd actually put it on his pants. And I'd answered the door in his sweatshirt, his pants. And we died laughing afterwards because I said, I don't know what this nurse thought.
She didn't come back to work.
Yeah. But you had to laugh, because if you didn't, you would lose your mind. You really would. You just had to laugh. And then we go on into 2008, and 2008 for us this is where I said you slightly jumped the gun. We lost the house in 2008, but you had the housing market crash, obviously. But for us in Ohio, two big things had happened. We don't get tons and tons of snow like you maybe do here, but the blizzard of 2008, if that term coined here, I don't know if it did here, but did by us. I think we had 26 inches of snow. Yeah. And we only had cars at that time. So we had a, 3/4 of a mile, half a mile long driveway. Couldn't get out. And we have Ava. Nurses can't get to us. We can't get out.
She was still in the hospital.
Oh, that's right. She was in the hospital. I'm sorry. But we couldn't get out. So we literally were snowed in. That showed us an urgency of, hey, this isn't a good thing. Then later in 2008, the Hurricane Ike had rolled through, and when it came through our area, it created this perfect storm, literally, where we had 70 to 80 mile an hour sustained winds for like 6, 7, 8 hours. And when it did this, the power went out everywhere. There was power in some areas, but I mean, it wasn't just our area. It was in a large, large swath. And we were out for 2 weeks. And that's what prompted her to go back to the hospital, because they had emergency services, but we didn't have anything. Put my ingenuity to mind, and I went looking for generators. No generators anywhere. None, not within 100 miles. I actually got an inverter, plugged it into the car, and we were able to keep the sump pump going and some other things going off of the car and whatever vehicle I had. But that led us to the vulnerabilities that we had. And that kind of sort of started us towards our homesteading journey, which is the second leg of this, why we wanted to talk to you, is we've got Ava, we've got all this medical fragile child, which go ahead and go to the next slide. I think, yeah, that's another slide of her getting
that was during one of her EEGs. She has pretty severe seizures due to her brain injury, and they were evaluating her seizure activity in that.
I think there's one or two more slides, because we're going to probably move on to Homestead. Go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, that's a little bit older, when her eyes finally opened, because they didn't open for a long time. What's that, about 5 months?
Probably.
Yeah. So, well, she's got a trach there.
That was in the fall of 2008.
That's a little older. Okay. So when you look at that, you start thinking, oh, maybe she's kind of improving. But she's not, in terms of there's still no cognitive. You can't talk to her. She can't talk to you. She can't walk. She can't roll over. Everything you would expect to see a child of that size do does not happen. And it took a long time to swallow that and get used to it. But that sort of led us to a homesteading journey, and that's where you go ahead and take it.
Well, and I think, we're probably going to skip from when she was, that picture's probably about a little over a year old, to current days, because that first year, Kenny and I were still waiting for that miracle, waiting for that improvement, waiting for anything. And it took us a long time to really get to a point where we accepted, okay, this is just the way our life's going to be, and we're going to make the best of it. And I had a lot of, one thing I want to share, and Kenny and I didn't realize it, but when we were in the midst of the first NICU visit, we both read the book of Job. And we very much identified, not to put myself up with Job, because he went through a lot more, but you read that, and that was our Job season in life. It seemed like one thing after another. We had this sick baby in the hospital. We finally got her home. She had pneumonia after pneumonia after pneumonia. Back in the hospital for 3 months. They foreclosed on our home. We lost our home. Both of our cars were repossessed. And I remember sitting in the garage going, what else can go wrong, And
more things did.
More things did. We won't go into all of them, but suffice it to say. But I just want to stress the point, and I had a few people ask me during this time, aren't you mad at God? Aren't you, why would, because I've heard a lot of people say over the years, how could God allow X, Y, Z? Mm-hmm. I will say that I won't say that I was never disappointed. I really wished it had went a different way, but I've never been mad at God. I don't think He owes me any explanation, and I never, through the darkest moments of this journey, I always felt He was there. He lifted us up. He provided along the way everything we needed. And to tag team on something Kenny said earlier, one of the things that I discovered very early on is God's perfect intent for us is to live forever with Him in heaven. And so that is the perfectly healed. And I remember Ava was probably 10 or 11. And at that point, we had many nurses through our home. And I remember sitting in church one morning, and the entire area where we sat, there must have been 20 chairs. They were all filled with nurses, former and current, and nurses' family members. And I remember looking over at Kenny and saying, all of these people are here because of Ava, And so that's something I would love to see her healed in this lifetime, but I trust his plan.
That ties into what you had said when last night we were over at Drew's, and he had talked about that perfect plan is when you're with God. That the perfect healing, I'm probably messing up some of your words, sorry, Drew, but it was essentially that, our healing, it looks this way, and God's healing looks this way. The perfect plan is being back with Christ, with him, eternity. And that is what we have to look forward to. That's what we should look for in our lives. We look at this, the here and the now. We want to see a healing now. We want to see the jobs restored, the physical taken care of. We want to see the pretty building, the whatever it is. They do not matter. They do not matter. They're interesting. There's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, nothing wrong with those things. But in the end, they do not matter. The rich man, the poor man enter heaven the same way. And while I knew that, this experience has really taught me that. Go ahead and go to the next slide, because I think there's only one or two left. That's just, that was another in her bed, because we're about to go on to the other transition. Go to the next slide. Yeah, that's the living room. That's my wife there, obviously, but that's where I woke up from, to the nurse.
I literally slept beside Ava for the first 9 to 12 months because I literally watched her oxygen machine 24/7.
Yep. Go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, she's all asleep in my lap. Look how young I look. Wow, what happened? I'm pretty sure that's the last one.
Ava was 14, and I think she was 2 or 3 in that picture, so
yeah.
it's...
Yeah. Go ahead and, is it me?
It's me, right there.
Okay, go for it.
So I want to kind of touch base on... So the house where we live, where Ava was born, that's the home we lost to bankruptcy in 2008. We moved into a rental home, and we lived there for a total of 9 years. And because of what we went through with Hurricane Ike and losing electricity and all of that stuff, like Kenny said, that really showed us how ill-prepared we were in the event. And I know a lot of people will make comments about, when the apocalypse happens, or preppers, or this or that. And anything can happen. That long-term power outage was something that was very real, and it happened to us. And we had a medically fragile child, and we were without power for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so that really launched our homesteading journey. So when we moved to this rental house, we couldn't, plant trees and build buildings, but I call it homestead where you are. Even if you're in an apartment, you can use a pressure canner, you can do what you can. So we lived in this rental home for 9 years, and I grew up, my mom always had a garden, we always canned. And so I had those skills, but I had kind of gotten away from it because I was working in marketing in the corporate world for a long time. But when we moved into this rental home, I really kind of went back to my roots, and I planted a garden. We had the people that owned the house had a flower bed out front. There was no flowers planted, but I used that for my garden. I planted tomatoes and peppers out front. But we adopted that homestead where you can. We actually rented an Amish barn, the ones that where they can pull them in on a truck and they pick them up when you're done. We rented a barn. We had chickens. So that's where we started gardening, raising chickens for eggs and meat. And so we started canning and things like that. So.
And another thing that just came to my mind, it wasn't in the notes, but it came to my mind, we talked about the power outage. So we moved to this new rental, and I'm a weather guy, by the way. I'm a certified weather spotter. I love weather. It's one of my side things. And a derecho, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically a severe line of thunderstorms that are very, very powerful with it's what they call bow echo. Bow echo, it's where they're moving so fast that they look like a bow. And it rolled through, and they had straight line winds clocked over 100 miles an hour, knocked the power out again for almost another 2 weeks. This is like 4 years later, in this different home, different county. And now I'd had a generator by this point, but it was funny that it was like a repeat. It was just showing us, the vulnerabilities that can be there, particularly with a medically fragile child. Her ventilator has only a half an hour battery on it plus a 6-hour backup, but that's sort of not dependable. And then that's it. She doesn't have an oxygen or a ventilator, so you've got to power this piece of equipment. So when Vicki's talking about our homestead journey, we homesteaded where we were, and then trying to look at the notes and see if I'm jumping, but we go through that process of living in this rental property and ended up, we wanted a home. We tried to buy a home that was actually close to my shop. We tried for a year solid. And it was a cheap place. Didn't work. Nothing would work. The financing wouldn't come through. We couldn't agree on payment, just you name it. Seemed like the perfect place. It had a big building. It was literally across from the shop I was renting. It wasn't far from the house we lived in. God was saying no, I just didn't realize it. And what we were doing is we were going for our wants and not his will. And there's a huge difference there. We had also bought a piece of land, and we thought we were going to build there, and nothing worked there. Fell through right on our faces. We actually ended up surrendering the land back. It was a land contract, and it worked out perfect. But we did that, and all the money we had spent preparing that land, when we had found the home that we're in, it clicked, went perfectly fine. The place appraised for more than it was worth, and it appraised for the same number, almost to the T, that we had spent on the other property. Like, can't make this up. And by doing that, it gave us some room to breathe, and we'd had the home that we live in now, which is, I think, where you come in, explaining the home, but it was magic the way it worked out. It wasn't magic, it was God, but just the way it worked out.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of expand a little bit on what Kenny said. We had bought land and tried for a year and a half, and the whole time we're making payments on this land for that year and a half. And in the land contract agreement, we could surrender it back at any time, but we're not going to get our payments back. And so we made 18 months worth of payments or thereabouts. I figured it up in 15 or 18 months. We had paid like $23,000 in payments, and we ended up forfeiting this land back. We didn't keep any. We just threw all that money away. And then when we bought our farmhouse that we're in now, I remember the realtor telling me it's probably not going to appraise for more than a couple thousand of what we're asking, and he was really prepping me on this. And he called me back and he goes, Vicki, this is crazy. He said that your house appraised like $23,000 higher. And I was like, that's exactly how much we lost on our last place. Thank you, Lord. So that was our equity.
Yeah. I don't know if any of you have ever seen or familiar with the Kendricks brothers, and they do like Facing the Giants and Flywheel and Overcomer. There's all these Christian movies. What's the other? Courageous. They did a movie. Their very, very first one was called Flywheel, and I love this movie. It's very, very simple. They built it on a cheap budget down in Georgia, but there's a scene in there where the guy who owns a car lot, speaks to me, imagine that. He owns a car lot, and he had swindled some people out of money when he had sold cars. And he's going back to repay them now that he's saved. He's paying back the money that he took. And he's figuring up the books, and he sold all the cars he had on his lot. God had intervened, and he sells all the cars in the lot, and his wife is figuring up the books on how much he owes all these people. And the number of how much he sold versus what he owes is exactly the same. And I watched that not far, that was before this had happened, but it came right back as soon as this appraisal comes back. And I'm like, it's the scene out of that movie. It's like a movie script. It was just, the blessings have been there that in ways I can't even explain. But every time we turn back and look at the story, and you get a little teary-eyed yourself, this story, I love to share it whenever I can because I feel people need to hear it. Not us. I don't care about what you think about us or what our story is. I want you to know that there is a God. He's in control, and that He's the one that will help if you ask. But you need to come to Him. You need to surrender to Him.
The farmhouse we live in now, we purchased in 2018, and unlike the previous attempts, it went so smooth. I mean, it's an 1820s farmhouse. There's something wrong with it somewhere. And it passed the first inspection. And I don't know how inspections work here in Pennsylvania, but in Ohio, they can be pretty strict. And I mean, this inspector didn't find anything wrong. And I was like, okay. But what's ironic is this place, we would never have given it a second look because we had our heart set, especially on the land. We had 24 acres of land. We had already decided in our hearts that we wanted to build a house. We designed it ourselves. We had our hearts set on that. And that wasn't what God had for us. And this little farmhouse on it's just a little over 5 acres. It's nothing special, but man, We had been there about a year, and I remember telling Kenny, I said, can you imagine the amount of debt that we would be in if we had, because if the bank would have approved us on that land and building the house, we would have signed. We would have, because we were so focused on what we wanted, we didn't look at what was best. And God was looking out for us. But I told him about a year after we bought this farmhouse, I said, man, can you imagine how much debt we would be in if we had built that house? And he said, I know. And it's just awesome. But why don't you talk about the solar install?
Oh, yeah, I kind of did miss that. I'm sorry. Trying to keep on track. When we moved in, just a quick synopsis, we moved in and it needed work. I don't remember exactly what the inspector did or did not see, but it needed work. Biggest issue was it had some mold in the basement I had to fix because I have an allergy, and we went through that, fixed the house, fixed up that stuff, I should say. And then we ended up adding solar panels later because I wanted to be self-sufficient. We've had all these power outages. We have this daughter. I'm done. So we put solar in, and it really made a big difference in terms of electric bill. We'd had $800-900 electric bills in the winter because it was a total electric house.
1820s farmhouses
no
are
insulation.
Not efficient.
No insulation. We took care of all that stuff over time, and in the last several years, it's finally kind of gotten to a place where everything's on an even keel. There's not, except for just a few weeks ago, the septic decided to blow up on me. But we can take care of it now. We can get that done and not have to pay and call extra contractors. And we finally got all that handled. And now we're in a place where we can be our own little family in this niche, but yet people can come and see us. We can talk with them. And we got into a tree business where we sell trees. We get these opportunities to witness to people, to interact with people, kind of like your bed and breakfast. You get the people you get to see, because we can't really go a lot of places. To come here was an interesting feat, to say the least, with a nurse, and not to mention the truck troubles. But if that hadn't been an issue, just to get out so people can come to us. And that blessing has been given by God that, we might not be able to get out, but we are a family on this little farm. And I wouldn't trade it.
I agree. So talk about our homesteading journey a little bit. It launched as a result of the remnants of Hurricane Ike and that whole journey. To tell you kind of where our heart is with that, Kenny and I don't like to depend on going to the store. I remember, if anyone remembers the great toilet paper apocalypse of 2020 with COVID, the stores were running out of things, and because we try to stay prepared. That didn't affect us. And that's how we like to live, in a way that we don't have to go to the store if we don't want to. We don't have to, Kenny wanted to get the solar to a point where if we chose, we could go off grid now if we chose to. We are still hooked up to the grid. But our motto is self-sustainable when possible. We just wanted to move away from being dependent on the system, being dependent on stores, being dependent on, there's baby formula shortages right now. So when we bought the farm, we kind of sat down and figured out, what do we want to focus on? So we put in several large gardens. We grow probably at this point, and we've really not tried to put a whole lot of effort into it, but even just messing around, we grow at least 50%, maybe 75% of our own produce. Last year, we put in 50 pounds of seed potatoes. We harvested 400 pounds. Whatever we don't need for our family, we put into our farmers market, which we launched last year, and we sell the extra. So we raise dairy goats. It's really nice. If you run out of milk, you can go out to the barn, milk a goat. You've got milk. We use the milk to make cheese. We make cultured milk products. We make goat's milk soap. When we first bought this farm, and I'm somebody, I don't like brother government in my driveway. I remember I called the local office and I said, this is what we want to sell in our farmer's market. I don't want to sell anything that requires licensing. So basically everything we sell, goat's milk soap does not require special licensing. I do home catering. We sell vegetables. In 2018, when we bought the farm, one of the first things we did was start planting fruit trees. We planted, I think, 2 or 3 peach trees and some pear trees, and that was in 2018. I think we started with 7 trees, and now we have 114 fruit trees, and that includes nut trees. But so last year, our Belle of Georgia peach trees started producing, and man, there is nothing better than walking out to your own orchard and grabbing a fresh peach off the tree, and you've got juice running down your face. Store-bought peaches do not compare. So we have gardens, we raise goats for milk and meat, we make our own soap, we have a farm market on site. We've tried as much as possible to be self-sustainable, and because we can't get up and leave, and it's like Kenny said, it was kind of a chore to come here. We try to do the best with where we are. So I wanted to make sure I
think you hit most of it.
Yep. So yeah, our farm market launched in 2021, and we've been living the homesteading lifestyle now since 2008. So we're quite a few years into this journey, and recently we've shifted into our passion now is educating others to homestead where they are. I have had so many people say, well, we don't own a farm, or we don't, we can't do what you guys are doing. I was like, you don't have to do what we're doing. You do the best with what you have, even if you live in town. Mm-hmm. You can still be a homesteader.
Absolutely. And I think so. To the last kind of thing I want to wrap it up into is we've already said it several times, but where's God in all this? Besides the obvious of what I've told you testimony-wise, what I would love to leave you with is no matter where you are in your journey, whether you are in your faith, God is faithful. He is true. He is righteous. And even when it doesn't seem like it, but, surrender to Him, give Him your all. Be baptized, follow in the faith, do those things. Do that now. We're not promised tomorrow. If the day before Ava's birth, you would have thought that tomorrow is going to be her birth, everything's okay. We're going to have a healthy baby girl, everything's good. Tomorrow is not promised. I am proof of that. And what we didn't say in here, and it wasn't actually on our list, is there's actually a couple times that I've almost been killed. I actually had a trailer fall off of a rack on me, and I shouldn't be here. I should not be sitting in front of you talking. And yet here we are. But tomorrow is not promised. The day before that happened, I would have never known. So no matter where you are, don't let that slip away. Don't let that moment slip away from you. Take your faith by take it serious and read your Bible, get into the Word, get into God, because that's what we have. That's all we have. And we're living testimony of that. And I think that's what I want to share. That's like your heart too. The whole reason of even coming here and telling you our story is for that purpose, to have an impact and hopefully move you on your faith.
One of the things I want to leave you with that's on my heart too is we've not shared the entire testimony like this very often. And when we do, people generally tend to say, oh, you're so strong, or you're this, or you're that. And I really want to, that's okay, but this focuses on the Lord and what He has done. We haven't done any of this. I'm no stronger than anybody else sitting here. When you're faced with an obstacle in life, you don't have a choice. You just have to survive. You have to get through it. And so I want our testimony to glorify God, not glorify us, glorify Him. He's the one that has put everything and sustained us through all of this. He's the one that has put people in our life. So this is nothing that we've done. This is all Him.
Amen.
Amen.